All right, guys, we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you all for coming out. And just wanted, before we do get started, I want to mention that Gary and William Ritter will be here doing a kind of a Christmas special tomorrow at 3 o'clock. Gary is going to be talking about some old-time Christmas traditions, and William's going to be providing musical accompaniment. So if you can make it to that, please do.
I'm going to tell Mr. Fox. Yeah, it's a scary story. And I never have understood that, but it's a Christmas tradition.
Sounds great.
Yeah, it'll be a lot of fun.
Scare people badly.
I like the grim ones. Okay, well, I think we have an array of people who will be familiar to the viewing audience. We are beginning with Mr. Waldrop.
Thank you. Thank you. This seems like it's been so long ago. What I want to share with you tonight, I was stunned by the Kavanaugh hearings and Christine Blasey Ford, and went ahead and wrote a couple of things. They're not that long. The first one's called Guilt and or Shame. After watching the testimony of Dr. Christine Blasey Ford and Judge Brett Kavanaugh during the Senate Judiciary hearing, I've come to believe that there's little possibility that Dr. Ford can, could, or will ever present enough evidence to merit a conviction in a court of law. Kavanaugh had and still has far more legal tools at his disposal than Ford does. In spite of that, why did a man who uses logic, reason, and critical analysis in his chosen occupation of law every day resort to emotional pleas for rescuing his reputation and his ambition to become a Supreme Court justice? Before or after his testimony, has Brett Kavanaugh offered up any suggestion for better protection for women and those who are more vulnerable to sexual predators? He showed great emotion about his own set of circumstances, but missed a monumental opportunity to focus our attention on a serious worldwide human rights problem. Dr. Ford may recognize the futility of appealing to Kavanaugh's legal mind. Laws are enacted in hope that citizens will willingly obey them or will fear the consequences of failure or refusal to do so. This is the realm of establishing legal guilt. However, there may be a more compelling argument to her case than the legal aspect. Could Dr. Ford have possibly been appealing to a higher law, the realm of morality and spirituality? Here the focus is the feeling inside someone called shame. A conviction for a crime may or may not accompany the feeling of shame. Shame can be felt without any accompanying allegation of a crime. Consider this. Do you believe Jesus said these words in the Sermon on the Mount? Matthew 5:23 and 24, King James Version. Therefore, if thou bring thy gift before the altar, and there rememberest that thy brother hath aught against thee, leave there thy gift before the altar, and go thy way. First, be reconciled to thy brother, and then come and offer thy gift. Do you recall Dr. Ford referring to her own beliefs and spirituality? Most likely not. Do you recall Brett Kavanaugh referring to his spiritual belief and base? Yes, he steadily stressed his adherence to Christian beliefs and actions. Could he now be ignoring the words of Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount as written in Matthew? He knows whether his answer has to be yes or no to that question. It is true that Dr. Ford did not refer to Jesus' teaching. Does that imply that she does not adhere to the tenet expressed in Matthew 5:23 and 24? There is a Christian belief that each of us must meet our Maker, God. God is supposed to be all-knowing, all-powerful, and all-present. Therefore, the person, if there is one, who attacked Dr. Ford might at some time step up, confess the deed, and seek restitution according to the doctrine expressed in Matthew 5:24. Roughly 50% of the United States population is female. Their percentage of legislative bodies at all levels in America is nowhere near that. Political decisions are made primarily about women rather than being made by women. Is it high time for a change in this crucial political imbalance? Legendary singer-songwriter Waylon Jennings sang, "I can't say I'm proud of all the things that I've done, but I can say I've never intentionally hurt anyone." Have legislative bodies unintentionally endangered women and those most vulnerable because they do not look through the eyes of those who are abused? Maybe they have unintentionally hurt women as well as those most vulnerable in our society. Do you believe that Dr. Ford knows there is a man, either Brett Kavanaugh or someone else, who needs to get up from the altar and reconcile himself with her? Or do you believe that Dr. Ford is the one who needs to reconcile herself with the man she has accused, namely Brett Kavanaugh? Or do you believe the scripture from Matthew 5 has little to no relevance to the issue of sexual assault? Or that it's simply irrelevant today? Let's remember, churches, schools, and many civic state organizations and agencies are faced with similar accusations, lawsuits, and investigations almost daily. Do you sense that current laws across America fail to provide adequate and appropriate protection for vulnerable children, especially girls? What more could America do to protect those who need protection? Since most youth of America are prohibited from holding political office, perhaps we should elect more women and minorities to address the scourge of sexual exploitation. As Anna Marie Archinal so vividly demonstrated to Senator Jeff Flake in the elevator regarding the Kavanaugh nomination process, we must be willing to look into the eyes of abused people and promise to do whatever we can legally to make their lives safer. Are we not morally obligated to do this as well? The Declaration of Independence states, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." Is not sexual assault one of the most heinous barriers to a woman's pursuit of happiness? We can't go back in time and prevent abuses that have already occurred, inflicting a lifetime of pain on each victim among us. But we can and should elect people to Congress who will willingly look into the eyes of women and children and commit the United States of America to a safer future. Let's elect a few women, along with minorities, to lead us through this mess. I wrote this before the election, by the way, in case you don't know. Thank goodness it happened. Now this is the other one I wrote. It's really short. It's called "Look Into My Eyes." On the 28th, we heard a new song. It made us want to sing along. Written by Sooner or Later, sung to Flake in that elevator. Captured by the microphone, pumped to millions in their homes. She said, "Look into my eyes." Flake could not find a place to hide. Millions listened as never before. Words of Anna Archinal. Did these words stick in Flake's mind? If they did, he did not cry. When he got back to that room, it was either breath or doom for Kavanaugh's lofty goal. To hell with Christine Blasey's soul. Brett wants to sit in that big high chair. Christine wants the world to care. Anna said, "Look into my eyes. Her words will haunt us day and night." Anna said, "Look into her eyes. Her words will haunt us day and night." Now, Sooner or Later done sung their song, asking us what's right and wrong. Can we count on Kavanaugh to protect us under the law? Will he work against abuse? Has he told us any truth? Will Mr. Flake stand by our side? Will he look into our eyes? Will he cry for those in need? Or will he simply party heed? Anna said, "Look into my eyes." Her words will haunt us day and night. Anna said, "Look into my eyes." Her words will haunt us day and night. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you,
Uh,
thank you.
Your flashlight's on.
I felt a little light when I was up there.
Yeah, it bothered me the whole time you were up there. You were flickering on and off just like a lightning bug.
I'm a little lightheaded now. Thank you, Gary.
Well, of all the comments after that, I didn't expect your flag was up.
Well, that's what you need on
I
that.
didn't see it. I was looking in your eyes. That second one could be, you could put that to music.
It was great, yeah.
Yeah, I wrote it as a poem.
Put it, Paul, we'll just put it to a guitar and see what you got.
I believe we may be about to learn some truth through plumbing.
Yay!
Plumbing
Let it flow.
restores all of our realities.
We will continue with the truth about plumbing. This chapter is called The Pipes. To have a meaningful discussion about modern plumbing pipe materials, and the various methods of putting the parts together, it's necessary to delve deeply into the philosophy of human existence and our net value to the ecological order on Earth. There is no practical, affordable pipe material available that is safe for human health or beneficial to the environment. In many ways, plumbing is the quintessential aspect of human existence that differentiates us from the rest of the animal kingdom and all other forms of life on this planet. All other forms of life on Earth are regenerative. They leave the planet at least slightly more suitable for a continuation of the evolution of life than when they first arrived. 100% of everything produced by all other living organisms is readily recycled into the biosphere, building on the already rich and thick layer of topsoil that has accumulated over the millennia. Decomposing flesh, blood, bones, leaves, bark, and roots are consumed by plants and animals or absorbed back into the chemistry of the soil, enriching it with calcium, phosphorus, nitrogen, and the myriad of other minerals of which life is composed. But inherently, plumbing systems that serve modern man are designed to be the antithesis of the natural order of things, thereby creating a break in the regenerative chain of life that has existed since primordial times on Earth. When designing a plumbing system, we seek to find the materials that will best and for the longest duration withstand the forces of nature. We look for materials that will not deteriorate rapidly when coming in contact with water. It must be resistant to damage from heat and light. It cannot be readily biodegradable. The materials need to be as inert as possible so they are not toxic to people who drink the water. When bees build a hive, they create beeswax as their construction material. When they leave the hive, the wax becomes food for other living organisms and for the soil that absorbs its nutrients. But plumbing materials in our homes, businesses, and factories will be excavated by archaeologists many thousands of years from now, virtually intact, with no benefit to the soil or any organisms that attempt to consume the chemicals from which they were manufactured. While we haven't in any way entirely succeeded in developing materials that are both indestructible and non-toxic to ourselves or our environment, we have succeeded in developing materials that are useless to the environment. Avoiding toxicity is another matter entirely. Beginning with the oldest type of material still used in some plumbing applications, let's first examine iron pipe, both cast and wrought. Cast iron drain lines are still used in multi-story buildings where vertical strength is essential to maintain the structural integrity of the system. Cast iron drain and vent pipes also provide a measure of fire resistance between floors of tall buildings, in contrast to flammable PVC that can carry flames from one floor to the next. But cast iron pipe has its problems and limitations. It's extremely heavy, for one thing. The manufacturing process is very heat energy intensive, involving the burning of coal or other fossil fuels that pollute the environment and generate high volumes of greenhouse gases. Because of its weight and round shape, transportation from factory to end user is very difficult, dangerous, and expensive. Cast iron pipe is attached to its fittings with joints filled with hot molten lead. Sometimes these joints have to be poured under extremely difficult and dangerous conditions in tight, unventilated spaces, near live electrical wiring, in the midst of fiberglass insulation, batting that burns like a pile of loose hay, or near moisture, which, if it comes in contact, will cause the hot lead to explode in the face of the plumber. Over a period of decades, varying depending on the mineral content and acidity of the water, cast iron will rust through, begin to leak, and need to be replaced, leaving behind an iron oxide lead mess contaminated by E. coli and other pathogenic and parasitic microorganisms and slimy mold mixed with algae. It is very impractical and difficult to separate the metals and attempt to recycle them. Just handling them should require a full-body hazmat suit. Cast iron used for large drain pipes is a hard, rigid, and brittle metal. A sledgehammer can be used to break cast iron into pieces because it has no flexibility. In contrast, wrought iron is malleable. It can be dented or bent into a different shape without rupturing the pipe. Wrought iron is commonly used for supply lines in tall commercial buildings, again, due to its structural strength and fire-resistant properties. Galvanized wrought iron pipe is used for water lines because the sacrificial layer of zinc plating delays the oxidation of the pipe walls into iron oxide, otherwise known as rust. Wrought iron pipes used to carry so-called natural gas or propane, on the other hand, can't use galvanized. I have to scroll down just a second. Come on. My computer is not cooperating.
They're nice when they work.
Okay. Can't use galvanized pipe because the zinc eventually flakes off inside the pipe, clogging appliance orifices or interfering with the full closure of valves, posing health and fire hazards. So gas lines in tall commercial buildings are constructed using black wrought iron pipe that is uncoated. The zinc coating on galvanized pipe begins to deteriorate immediately as soon as water is first introduced into a new plumbing system. The rate at which this happens depends on the mineral content and acidity of the water, as well as the system pressure and the speed at which the water moves through the pipes. Water sitting overnight in galvanized iron pipes will allow the chemical reaction resulting in the formation of zinc oxide that will be consumed from kitchen sinks and water fountains. As the pipe ages and further deteriorates, microscopic zinc particles and larger flakes begin to enter the water stream at a greater rate. A small amount of ingested zinc oxide may not be harmful to people and may even be beneficial according to some cosmetic and food supplemental manufacturing companies. On the other hand, there have been studies indicating this chemical can cause decreased kidney function and sperm counts in laboratory rats. I'll leave it to the reader to decide what to believe on this matter. Once the zinc wears thin on the interior of galvanized pipes, water begins to come in contact with the iron beneath, forming iron oxide. A report by the World Health Organization states that iron oxide in water promotes the growth of undesirable bacteria. The same study warned that acute exposure to iron oxide can result in depression, rapid and shallow respiration, coma, convulsions, respiratory failure, and cardiac arrest. Anyone thirsty?
Oh. Was there any hope for power? A little nerve-wracking.
Oh, boy.
Nerve-wracking.
There's one.
Yeah, thanks, Auburn.
Susan White. No doubt more good cheer is still to come.
All right.
Alrighty. Let's see, I actually do write fiction as well, so I have a short fiction that I just finished, and I'm going to read that. It's not a very Christmassy story. It's called Driving the Dead. Take a lecherous old man, give him cancer. Put him in a car with a beyond middle-aged daughter who has no one, nothing else, an ex-nun. She, Lauren, is driving him to chemotherapy in heavy traffic, praying often for his death, never for his soul. She prays for the children, world peace, the innocent, but has nothing tangible, no one to pray for. At church, almost aloud, she forces herself to pray for an end to his suffering, tells herself that this will mean an end to her own despair, but knows that when he is dead, her despair will only worsen, for he has robbed her of all willpower. God have mercy, God have mercy. On and on she repeats this in church, at home, in silence to herself, but has not the slightest desire to understand what this phrase might mean. He is slumped against the window in the back seat, not asleep, dead by all appearances. The dead eyes opened so wide, so set back and dark in his emaciated face, that passers-by stare and turn quickly away, trying vainly to wipe the impression from memory. She is his oldest daughter, the youngest being long dead, along with their mother. Once their memories had stirred in her the desire for God as love, without which she was sure she would have gone the way her sister, who committed suicide when she was 19. After Lindsay's suicide, her guilt, her inability to believe in Jesus Christ, consumed and became one with her faith, her hatred of her father, her need for God as a force of absolute power, absolute vengeance. Questions such as what kind of God would allow such suffering are only asked by people who understand God as love. But her God was the God of necessity, which drives not good over evil, but eternity over death, death back into life, and life into death forever. If unforgiving, unforgiven, unforgivable. She believes in Christ the same way she drives the dead, her father, by force of habit and because her religion requires her to. It is her fate. In some crime story, she would murder her father, She longs to be strong enough to drive the car into a tree. She has tried therapy, psychoanalysis, liberal politics, but always that emphasis on healing, salvation, forgiveness, the essential goodness of the soul, human innocence, has driven her away. She cannot forgive, will never believe in human love greater than human evil. She had been a postulate when Lindsay died and left the Sisters of Mercy not long afterward, went back to law school, became a lawyer, didn't see her father for over 20 years until he called to say he was dying. She told him she didn't give a shit if he rotted in hell, but began losing cases and knew that something was failing inside her. The will to overcome, to win, died. She returned to him, defeated, alone. They barely speak, make no pretense of caring for each other. He has money, pays her well, better than he would a full-time caregiver. She nurses him very little, sets up his wheelchair, but is mostly his driver and lawyer. She has power of attorney over him, and for now finds cynical pleasure in the farce. She gives him his medicine, but won't touch him. The nurse comes in 4 times a week to bathe him, change the sheets, take his blood, and give him shots. He can get in and out of the wheelchair on his own for now. If he falls or slips from the wheelchair, she holds it and watches him struggle into it on his own. The time will come, she knows, when she will have to hire a full-time nurse, when he won't be able to feed himself, to get onto the toilet, to hold out his hand for the pills. How his cadaverous frame does so even now amazes her. Everyone who sees her turn away from him when he needs help looks at her as if she were the monster refusing to help a dying old man. Once, whenever they were in public, he was effusive in his emotions. My girls, he called them. Then Clarice, their mother, died of cancer, and even the pretenses slipped away. A year later, she left home, left Lindsay. She didn't know what else to do, couldn't think rationally. Much of her youth, the abuse that he committed on her and Lindsay, she has blocked from her mind. But there are scenes, many horrible, but many seemingly innocent, difficult to describe since most people wouldn't see the horror. After a memorial service at Lindsay's university, he had invited a group of her friends, all young women, to the house he had owned in a nearby town, the house Lindsay had retrieved his handgun from, shooting herself on a bench in the middle of the university quad on a bright spring day with many onlookers. Lauren had been standing a ways behind her father when he opened the door to Lindsay's friends. "Come in, girls," he said, with apparent humility that was all the more horrifying to her because he seemed so sincere, despite the fierce desire for corruption that lay behind the humble smile. As he turned, his eyes followed the prettiest of the girls, and he walked up to her a little too quickly so that he could sit next to her on the couch. The visit was awkward and full of silences, attempts to talk about Lindsay failing each of them in turn, her father shedding tears, leaning against, touching the girl next to him. Then her father remembered a particular song from the service, and one of the girls mentioned that she had made the tape for the service, telling him the name of the song, "I've Never Been to Me." His excitement as the girl retrieved the tape from her car and he played the song repeatedly was unnatural and disturbing. He stood with his eyes closed, tears streaming down his face, several of the girls crying with him. A girl walked up to him and he stood and hugged her. 2 more girls came and hugged him. The pretty girl remained on the couch, looking mostly at the floor. Her father returned to the couch, having asked a girl to set the tape player to repeat the one song. He asked the pretty girl about the time she had spent with Lindsay, what they had done together. She seemed reluctant to answer, so that he turned and asked the same questions of another girl who answered. Did she know? The pretty girl. She seemed to know something. conversation turned to the University Literary Journal and the fact that Lindsay had been the assistant editor and published some poems in it. The pretty girl, Michelle was her name, had been the editor. The name was familiar. Hadn't Michelle lived in Richmond too? Hadn't she and Lindsay spent time together last summer? Then her father remembered that he had a copy of the journal and almost ran excitedly to get it. She saw Michelle's face blanch as this man whom she must have known to be what he was read Lindsay's poem. She couldn't remember the words, but she knew that its central image was a spider's web that represented sexual predation, entrapment, and rape. The spider was a female serving a horrible male god, some vast, unseen force that fed from her web. Her father read the poem, unfazed, never even hesitating as the song played. I've been to paradise, but I've never been to me. What is it about? Her father exclaimed, turning to Michelle and grasping her hand. What is the poem about? Who is the woman? What does it mean? Michelle pulled her hand back, stood and shook her head. I don't know. But Lauren knew. She knew that Michelle knew. Lindsay had tried to talk to the dean of students about her father, the abuse, and the woman had refused to believe her. Now, she thought, I could do it now, drive into that tree, no one but ourselves to die. He was sitting behind her. She watched him in the rearview mirror that she had turned for the purpose of seeing him. He looked forward for an instant, and their eyes met in the mirror. He turned away and slumped back against the car window. She, too, was guilty of Lindsay's death. There was a woman she'd thought she would love for the rest of her life, Claire. They'd met when she went to collect Lindsay's belonging from her dorm the day after the memorial service. Claire was the house parent in the dorm, a graduate student at the university. They'd sat and talked for over 2 hours about Lindsay, about her father, about the dean who'd refused to believe Lindsay's claims of abuse. Claire moved to Chicago the following summer. Lauren left the convent and they lived together. Claire entered law school and Lauren did the same within a year. She doubted she would have made it through law school without Claire's support. The relationship had ended after 8 years when Claire, drunk, argumentative, had admitted to having a relationship with Lindsay, crying that she'd loved her and that she had encouraged Lindsay to talk to Dean Howard. Silence, followed by, you killed her. You could have said something too. For how many years? You knew about the abuse long before I did. You goddamn bitch. I lived that abuse. Claire was sobbing now, catching her breath. Lauren went on screaming. You were old enough when Lindsay died to have said something, anything. You were there with her. You were there. I know I abandoned her, but you were there. Even after she died, you never said anything. You killed her at least as much as I did. We all did, Claire whispered. Lauren walked out of the apartment that night and never saw Claire again. She continues to stare into the rearview mirror. Again, his eyes meet hers unwillingly. You will burn in hell, she whispers. We should all burn in hell. Silence, and he looks away, won't look back even as she talks to him. It's time to die. Don't you think it's time to die, Dad? She asks loudly. But she is crying. She hasn't the strength. The lecherous old man will live until God takes him, and she is not the hand of God. She is just the beyond middle-aged daughter, eager for him to die, yet mourning. What? Not his death, God forbid, but the fact that Satan doesn't exist, and he will not burn in hell. For it is all one, heaven and hell, life and death, God of love and the God of necessity that keeps her here, driving the dead, her eyes meeting his as she smiles the same, as she smiles the same humble, corrupt smile her father has not smiled since the onset of his illness.
Is that a part of a larger work?
It's not, no.
It's not, it's just
Yeah, it's just...
freestanding?
Yes. It is.
Bothered me because I felt like it was about me, you know, I'm in a wheelchair and getting worse and worse every day. Oh! But I'm not a lecturer, so.
No, it's a big difference there.
I thought it was about you at the beginning until we heard the history. It's powerful.
Merry Christmas.
I thought about that, I was like, oh, this isn't a good time to read this, but I'm gonna read it anyways.
Kind of a piece here.
I know, I put together, isn't it?
Well, I do not think we can rely on you to write the news, but I believe it is your turn nonetheless.
Oh, I thought you were ready.
Mm,
Oh, okay. I'm not ready.
I'll never go for you.
God, that ain't even right.
I thought about doing that too.
I ain't having big
You change your mind?
pages. Yeah. Just trying to get my,
Okay.
some people call it act together. I call it just getting my shit together. I may have read this 8 or 9 months ago. Something about your memory when you get older just kind of, you know. So if I have read it, I apologize. I haven't been writing a whole lot lately, trying to market, you know. So I'm going to read this piece, even if I haven't read it before. Years ago, when I came back from Nam, there were a lot of people that, for whatever reason, hadn't went in the military. Some of them I'd ridden on the bus over to Knoxville with that took salt tablets to get their blood pressure up and flunked the physical. But when we came back, they would say, "Wow, man, what was it like? I wish you could have been there." And I said, "Well, you don't want to know, really, and I can't explain it to you." But through the years, I kept thinking, I need to try to just see if I could write something on that. So I have attempted. An attempt to describe a firefight. I've been asked many times in the past to describe a firefight. Tell me what it was like, they would ask. God, how do you explain to someone who has never been there what it was like? The sounds, the smells, the confusion, and God forbid, the sights. Rounds cracking over your head and tearing through your senses. I'm not sure that you can describe it, or worse, that you should even try. Although I have read many books that did indeed try. Several of the authors were combat vets, and they did a fairly good job explaining what shit you went through. But the hard truth is that every fight is different, and every individual sees it a little differently. Someone who has never been there would probably never understand. But then again, it wouldn't be the first time I've tried to do something I probably shouldn't. So, here goes. To start with, let me tell you that I wasn't in the big fights like LZ X-Ray or Quezon or Hamburger Hill or 100 other fights that ripped and tore through unit after unit. But again, big or little, if you're the one in the shit, then it's big enough. I think in order for you to really understand a firefight, you need to do several things. First, take yourself back to the hottest day of your entire life. Whether you was out in the field, splitting wood, whatever. Then go back to the most tired and filthy that you have ever been. Stir all those memories up into a pot of pure shit. Throw in a ton of fear, mix in a little confusion, and then crawl into that pot and just sit there while I talk. Now understand that the first insects to swarm around you will be flies. They will come first. Then the god-awful mosquitoes buzzing in your ears, in your eyes, in your mouth. Look down and suddenly there's a leech on your leg or your neck. How? How did it get there? How do you feel in that pot of shit? Are you still with me? Regress a minute. Maybe you're an FNG, a cherry, with a lifetime to go in country. You know nothing, not a damn thing. Nobody seems to like you. Nobody talks to you. Or maybe you're short, almost out of there. And the stress of having only a few days left sucks the life and the will right out of you. If you can grasp all this, only then can you even begin to understand. Why do I have to put myself in these spots, you ask? If you ask that question, then you're already lost. Let's keep going. Maybe you're hacking your way through jungle vegetation as thick you can't see shit. Insects everywhere in your mouth, in your ear, down your neck. Maybe you're on flat, swampy ground, or land so steep you slide, you crawl, you claw your way through it. Maybe you're in a rice paddy, stinking buffalo shit, human shit, or a swamp where you slosh your way through. You're looking everywhere. Tripwires, bouncing betties, sweat stings your eyes. You see nothing and everything. Mosquitoes, God, you hate mosquitoes. Buzzing and biting your eyes, your ears, your neck, everywhere. Leeches appear magic on your neck, your leg. You worry about your other part. Could those things infect you? Fear of death, of being crippled like some guys you know. Fear of not doing your job. Fear of the unknown. You're tired. Your mind drifts back home, and your mind drifts between back home and what's dead in front of you, and then it happened. Bam, bam. Everybody drops. The old timers drop. You try to see what's happening, but the sounds seem like they're right over your head. Targets. You try to see a target, but all you see is nothing and everything, and tracers, and your buddies firing, people shouting. You're firing, trying to focus on where the tracers are coming from. Maybe the shit is coming in so hard you simply crawl into the ground, or you crawl out of the rice paddy, high step, and you run to the berm or the creek bank. Dirt can save you, an anthill can hide you, or a log, fire across the log. But sometimes you have nothing. Are you still with me? You have nothing except fear that can drive you. You have anger which can push you. And if you paid attention, you have your training which can guide you. The fire may last only a few seconds. People shouting, cussing, moving about. What do I do? What? The fight may drag on for several minutes or hours. You're thirsty. Your senses register sound like the dull snap of an AK, the sharper snap of an M16, the pounding of an M60, loud crushing sounds of a grenade or a mortar, the earth shaking, a painful cry, a call for a medic. Then the smells come. The rot and decay of jungle or swamp. Fear, you can almost smell fear. Napalm, burning, oily, hot stench. And when the senses are almost overwhelmed, the smell of burning flesh. Sour and sweet and sickening. Blood, you smell blood, yours? No. Ed or John's or the FNGs, not the LTs. Numbness, day after day of numbness. Your hands shake. Your feet peel like rotten cabbage. Your bowels thin. You want to get out of this shit, but you can't leave your buddies. You just want to go home. And back at base camp, you think about transferring out. You're looking for something, but you're not sure what. You're tired of humping. You're tired of the rear echelon shit. You watch as the choppers come and go, the door gunners. You watch them fly by and you think, I always wanted to fly. That's it. I'll be a door gunner. One of the many problems with being a door gunner is there is no place to hide. No dirt to hug, no log or anthill, just you and your M60. You lean out with one foot on the rocket pod that is spewing death and fire. The wind is screaming past your helmet and your 60 is pouring lead into the fight. Charlie's tracers streak past in an endless stream. The chopper shudders as AK rounds try to drag you down into their world. Not the first LZ, maybe not even the second, but soon you learn to harden yourself. It is a survival mechanism that you develop. You can't hide, so you steel yourself with one soft thought. I'll take as many of you with me as I can. That thought may seem alien to many of you, but it will keep you stable, keep your mind focused on the target. It is only after the firefight is over, the chopper is cleaned, and your 60 is spotless that your mind can relax a little bit, but then your hands begin to shake and your shoulders sag. The next day is the same, day after day. When you're not flying, you sometimes sit by yourself and listen to Johnny Cash or Merle Haggard, and you stare out past the hooch, out past the choppers, out past the damn jungle. You stare into nothing. You just stare. You have almost forgotten what your wife looks like, what a steering wheel feels like, what a mini-skirted round eye looks like. A good night's sleep, a bath, but every day you go back out. You have long ago given up on the ideal of saving the world from communism. And you know damn well these South Vietnamese don't want you here. You aren't even sure why the people back home are raising hell, burning their draft cards, hell, even burning their cities. You talk to the black guys and they aren't even sure what's going on. Here in the Nam, I've got his back, he's got mine. What will happen when and if you get home? Killing is your job. McNamara's war of attrition, body counts. It's always about the body count. We kill 10 times more of them, but when it's your buddy, how many kills does it take to make up for his loss? Bullshit. Just do your job, soldier. Do your best. You're finally getting on the Freedom Bird, going home. Almost afraid to think about it. They tell you that there may be protesters. No shit. What? Guys fall on their knees and you kiss the American soil when you exit the plane. You walk into the terminal, there they are. Who are they? I used a few F-bombs, I won't use them here. Hippies. What do they want? There's a wire mesh fence that separates us from them. We could kill them if we wanted, but instead we walk on. Don't look. They're shouting and spitting through the mesh. Baby killer, baby killer. Paper bags fly up against the wire. Probably dog shit. Who knows? Nobody talks. Jesus, what was that all about? We're soldiers, not baby killers. We change our clothes, head down, and go home. Now get out of that pile of shit. Don't ask me any more questions.
Sledgehammer.
It's the holiday.
Sherry Toronto,
I'm supposed to follow that?
you can only do your best. What else have we got?
It could be well done.
Happy holiday.
I couldn't find my sprig of holly or my mistletoe, but a happy solstice. Now, I might be changing glasses every now and then because I can't adjust my vision. I put the poems there for you. It's a little... When I go to a reading, I like to have someone's book with me so I can follow the line breaks and such. So I thought you might, read it if you want to, listen if you want. Joseph Campbell, professor of comparative literature, mythology, and religion, believed that all mythic narratives were variations on a single story, regardless of its time or place of origin. Monomyth, he called it, the tool all humans use to penetrate the phenomenal world to reach a source of energy. He considered the mythic quest heroic because it requires that one speak of things which existed before and beyond words. For him, myth was but the story of one's search for oneself translated into a common cultural experience, the macrocosm to the microcosm of the personal journey. To delve into the experience of the place that made me, which sounded really sort of familiar when you started to talk about it with all the mosquitoes and to To delve into the experience of the place that made me, I used the myth of the Fisher King as framework for a collection of poems from which I'm reading tonight. I hoped this particular myth would resonate thematically, amplifying those experiences from my deep South childhood, connecting them with experiences of my mothers who preceded me. I called this collection of poems The Fisher Queen. Albert Einstein once said, "What a sad era when it's easier to smash an atom than a prejudice." I prefaced The Fisher Queen with this epigraph because it reflects my sentiments for the era and the place of my youth. Apropos Einstein's quote, I'll first read Daughter Element, a shaped poem that's also a caudate sonnet, though I tweaked the form for my own purposes. The animus for the poem was an incident that occurred in 1957 off the coast of Tybee Island, Georgia, when two aircraft collided, one of them carrying an atomic bomb, which the pilot jettisoned into the marsh near Wassaw Island, one of my old stomping grounds. Whether the bomb had a nuclear trigger is still a matter of debate. The truth lying, as it often does, somewhere in the murky depths, which in this case is not only Wassaw Sound, but the basement of the Pentagon. Curiously, perhaps symbolically, the coastal population seems neither worried by the possibility of detonation nor the inevitability of corrosion. I hope the poem itself makes clear why I chose to use it to begin the volume. As with most things caught in the fray of time and memory, it lies forgotten, tangled up in decades of rush and mud, flotsam and jetsam, camouflaged and encircled by juncus, unfathomable, bandied half-truths, subterfuge, a folk bedeviled by generations of history, buried but not dead. So what's loved is imperiled by its own corrosive turbulence. Nature's maelstroms and tempests, unrelenting waves that could well unleash its elemental fury into that childhood fairy tale landscape, tarnishing home's autumn enclaves forever. For something taints what nurtures her cradle of life, stirs in murkiness that ebbs and flows, danger winding through the reeds, churning the mire. What you won't remember but can't forget, its pervasive shadow haunting life's give and take, its undertow. The next poem comes from my first real 50s memory in the town where my father's military service, in part, prompted our move from the country, an area just inland of Savannah, where my father's people settled generations earlier. Our first home here was former Army housing, and the memory of it and its furnace would later strike me as being symbolic of an era and the ambivalence I felt for it, even as a child, a feeling that would also shape my sense of place. I call the poem Deus Ex Machina, or God in the Machine, or as the OED insists, more accurately from the Greek, God from the machinery. Deus Ex Machina, 1957. First came the cold, then the stumbling clank and rumble of the unknown that triggered the jolt and the hollowing out. Something had stirred beneath the old-fashioned grate, a wrought iron wicker that could brand tender skin with angry lines. And all a child knew was something lurked under that fretwork. Its growl beneath dark metal scales, puffing glittery refuse that wafted in the updraft of its beastly spew, the source of both comfort and fear. In tandem with post-World War II military buildup and the U.S. assumption of the role of world leader, there came another kind of buildup, which those of my generation were first to experience. It was this buildup that landed us in suburbia. Many of you may recognize the distinctive intellectual and cultural character expressed in the next poem, what the Greeks call eidos, loosely translated as cultural or social identity. I entitled the poem Cartwheels. A budding Annie Oakley's tugging at her holster of silver pop pistols tasseled and swayed, but for a bit of red trim like flag striping, the outfit is black and white. A get-up that suffices a pale-faced kid sniffing the dark confines of a closet. The smell of Wild West wonder wafting from an open trunk lid as Running Bear chases little white dove round and round and round a turntable, its crackling epic a background to suburbia that's filling up with freckled children who hurtle across new lawns looking for all the world like pinwheels in the wind, leaning right before reeling left, only to flop into a whirl of neighborhood reality. Sweet gum and marigolds, brick and clapboard, Ford and Studebaker, framed by baluster and porch post. History's deluge of battle-hardened dissonance, transformed into an open-ended vernacular of youth. Magic that kids squirrel away in a pirate berth, reclaimed from an alleyway, really nothing more than a derelict steamer trunk, chock full of gold bullion, imagination, and freedom they believe escaped their parents' walls. Whether head over heels over British invasions or fretting chords of their own as they ape the 60s, they revel in a neverland of latitude, an exercise of margin in a dovetailed corner of the world where possibility fills the night sky before street lamps dim those stars in their eyes. Infinite constellations wedged into a narrow tongue of land barely inland, its salty bombs saturating their gasps after the dashes, after the saber rattling, after the tumbles and dervishes of impervious children who've marked time in the cards they have attached to spokes with clothespins. The gritty reckoning from the drive chain drowned out by the frenzied clack, clack, clack and whoosh of wheels across sandy ground. A slippery slope that seems so safe, everlasting, and benign. The next couple of poems come out of the same early but formative period of my adolescence. The first of them is an ekphrastic poem, in this instance a poem based on a photograph. It's called Perspective. Offset by spectacles, her dark chiseled face seems formidable yet withdrawn. She's behind the child, shouldering the white house as though supporting it, minding a tow-headed toddler riding her trike. The girl's subtly pressed coveralls dark against her stark white turtleneck, a glimpse of pristine lace peeking from beneath raised trouser legs as she reaches, in vain, for the pedal. No one remembers the woman's name. She's not noted on back of the photo, There's only a year, 1957, a time typified by this mise en scène. She's just another black woman in the background, a minder, a mender, a washer, a cook, nothing in the house she's not touched. She's handled the most personal things, from negligee to Cracker Jacks to the smallest twig of the family tree, their most precious possession. She's washed and dried and fluffed her way through white middle-class prosperity, ancillary and silent. Responsibility assumed, she's rewarded with their measured trust and courtesy, the parameters strictly defined and narrow as their white clapboard house, their yard a marginal field beyond which their social contract expires. And when she takes the bus for home, relegated again to the back, she'll assume her position, reflected in the black and white of this photo, well behind and left of her charge. The precarious perspective in a country built on getting ahead. My first real in-your-face experience of racial segregation was at my grandfather's gas station, which at the time we called a filling station, which was also the British designation. Hence the title. It takes place during the same period, the late 50s, early 60s, and please stop trying to figure out how old I am. I call the piece Filling Station at Ferguson Crossroads, 1959. The glaring white sidewalk blinds her, and she's tripping over a curb. Grappling for purchase at a doorway, she fumbles at the threshold but falls through it, landing on her hands and knees. A broken flag articulating beneath her weight, leaving impressions like inverted culverts. There's limey residue under a sink, corrosion eating away at a glimmer of steel that skewers a crumbling wall. All around her, a smell like her grandfather's tool shed unsettles her, arousing a child's slumbering knowledge of decay with a peripheral fear of something that taints the air. A malaise she can't yet connect to the flocked veins of neglect bulging through coats of whitewash, skeins of rot that mar the surface, hinting at disregard like lines on a dissolute face. Suddenly, dark arms are pulling her from the ring, her flailing legs upsetting the edict propped against the jamb, as a distant voice cackles a word in deep Southern phonetics. The next poem is a more imagist poem than a narrative one. I'd just like to say I did not pilfer Natasha Trethewey's title. I wrote the original of this long before hers came out. It's a short poem I called Narcissus, Georgia, 1964. Gathering around a tributary, dark as blackstrap molasses, they'd scowled at their reflections, dabbling at them with short sticks, to judge depth or to shoo away the unknown things lurking below the surface. Then, wielding nature's style eye, they'd whisk tendrils from their heads, conjuring effigies with perverted halos, more Gorgon than Guardian. No reason to look into this dark mirror anymore. Our likeness has been way too warped. No use either to wonder how others might have seen their image, distorted every time they'd reached in to embrace themselves, clarity pixelated by the surfeit trickling through narrow fingers, marred by every shallow plink and by ripples that moved outward. I wrote that thinking about all of the television images I saw as a child of the South that I knew well, but seeing it on TV somehow made it more, I don't know, real to me. I had a difficult time writing about events that took place in 1968. It was a very traumatic year, you remember, in American history. And it's a time for me best remembered in metaphor. So Joseph Campbell would be pleased. I call the poem Squall, 1968. That season, Old Salts sensed it coming, when changing currents would bank clouds layer on layer like supernal dry stack. Channels would quicken the wind, whipping cord grass and stirring tributaries into a elemental pressure cooker. Not so much a fulmination as an unfolding, a charged stillness before a quiver in the light shook loose the mystery of restraint. Then a rumble and a sweeping hiss, like a deluge of pine needles, prick everyone caught in the clamor. It was a turbulence as inescapable as the oppressive heat, which always returned too quickly. One palliative breath, 2, 3, should the sun dally before shredding cloud remnants. Then sulfur and tar would saturate, pollute the air, the smell like brimstone through stale cotton. Poem. This final poem is the last of the collection, and so jumps to the year 1987. I think you'll see why this poem is sort of in-game, as they call it. A New South Riddle, 1987. It's hardly morning now when their ruckus starts to roust drowsy comfort. Time was, a child's summer night's dream might linger beneath the white work counterpane. Time was that ubiquitous wine dozed too. Now nature's abuzz on the deep south clock. Mr. Coolidge has a new kind. The drone sputtering in fits and starts before it pierces the air with a skreek. We're here, and we'll never leave because we control the heat. You look for the cause, but it's nowhere and everywhere. Dixie gadflies hissing in your head, cached underground until they shed their skin. Then one day you find proof there, an empty shell, crusty offal like some Paleozoic relic, the spitting image of what was the insect inside, right down to the tiny split hairs. Ridiculous thinking, something so ugly, so shrill should inform a culture. Much better mellifluous tree frogs, or a squabble of gulls. Even the old resonant toad. Better that trio of comfort tempting us to believe the heat could never rise again.
Our final reader is Gary Carden, who will be telling us about Mr. Fox tomorrow afternoon at 3.
I'd like to invite all of you to my program tomorrow. at 3 o'clock. It'll probably be in this room here. I'm doing a program with William Ritter. Those of you are familiar with William, you know, maybe that'll get you here, whereas I might not. William plays, an incredible musician. He and I are doing podcasts right now, and I'm sort of excited about that. We'll wait and see. It could fall to pieces, but right now we have a podcast going about the program tomorrow, 3 o'clock. I want to talk about Old Christmas, and it's mostly entertainment. It's about all of the things that are gone now, that we've lost, that used to be a part of Christmas. And some of them are surprising, of course. I want to tell Mr. Fox, which bewilders me as much as it will you, I'm sure. But Mr. Fox is a horror story, and it was always told on Christmas Eve. I don't know why. Makes no sense to me. There's a whole series of stories that were told on Christmas Eve. Most of them exaggerated stories like you'd get on the liar's bench. But the one that everyone talked about was Mr. Fox. It was not called Mr. Fox in England or Scotland or Ireland. There it was the Robber Bridegroom, or it was Bluebeard. It had different names, and sometimes it was based on the man who set out to be the most evil man that ever lived, Gilles de Rais, and he pretty much succeeded. I think he killed well over 200 people, but one of the most interesting things about him, of course, is he's a contemporary with Joan of Arc. Well, I'm getting off the subject, but I'll tell you this much, and then I'll go on with my pathetic little program. When Joan of Arc was called to lead France into battle, she went to the Dauphin, the young king sitting on his throne, and she wanted to ask him, please give me an army. I'm here to lead it. He sent me. Well, the Dauphin heard about her before she got to the court. And Gilles de Rais, who was a friend of the Dauphin's, was there too. The ultimate evil man. And while they were waiting for them to bring Joan in, they thought it was a joke. They would change places, and so Gilles de Rais sat on the throne, and the Dauphin got down and sat with the nobleman where Gilles de Rais was, and Joan walked in and didn't even hesitate, went straight to the Dauphin. And that impressed the Dauphin. It impressed Gilles de Rais too. And afterwards, when she went to battle, he followed her. And a lot of people think that Gilles de Rais was the reason she survived in battle, because he stood in front of her with this incredible sword. And wasn't, he saw that no one ever got near her. Why? Considering what he was and what she was, Well, anyway, what I want to talk about. Come tomorrow, 3 o'clock if you can. It'll be harmless. We may have refreshments, I don't know, and it may be in this room. I'll tell you about some of the peculiar, strange, weird things our ancestors did for Christmas. Okay, question before I struggle on. I'm going to tell you a story. I'm not going to read anything. always before when I came in here, I read something. Well, I got news for you. Telling a story is just as literary, just as much an achievement in the arts as writing your story or a poem. So I'm going to tell you a story. In 1953, when I graduated from high school here in Sylva, I lived with my grandparents. My father had been killed, and I ended up living with my grandparents. And they were a little bewildered by me. They didn't know what to make of me, and I think I disturbed them greatly. They were frequently concerned. I would hear them talking to each other sometimes, and they would talk about it. Well, he's such a strange little young'un, you know. Well, do you think he's sane? You know, it does things to you to grow up to hearing your grandparents say things like that. And then my grandfather would say, well, I think he's got bad blood from his mother's side, of course. That makes him weird. You know how crazy they are over there. Well, anyway, I was a disappointment to my grandfather, but when I was 18, I really disappointed him because he bought a new Dodge truck. And I asked him to let me drive it down to the Ritz Theater in Sylva because I was madly in love with the ticket taker at the, you know, I didn't think I could live without her. And while I was there talking to her, a friend of mine named Jimmy Stovall came in and said, Gary, can I borrow your truck? And I said, no, Jimmy, you can't borrow my truck. That's not my truck anyway. It's Granddaddy's truck. And why did you want it? And he says, I want to go to Cherokee and see the love of my life. And of course, I knew who he was talking about. She was a beautiful thing, but I wouldn't let him have the truck. So he says, can I have the truck to go down to the phone booth? And we had phone booths in 1953. And I said, okay. Well, of course, he tricked me. He went straight to Cherokee. Of course, he didn't make it to Cherokee. He wrecked in Barkage Creek, and he totaled this truck. It turned it into a total twisted mass of metal. And I didn't know it. I was standing in the Red Theater talking to the love of my life, who didn't return the favor, but that didn't bother me at all. And I came out afterwards, and I was standing in front of the Ritz Theater, and I realized, well, Jimmy, I think, tricked me. I think he took the truck and went to Cherokee. I'll stand here under the marquee and wait for him to come back. And he didn't come back. And eventually a taxi driver, Scroop Lewis was his name. I love the names in this. They're real names too. Scroop pulled up in a taxi and rolled the window down and says, "Hi, Gary. Anybody hurt in that wreck?" And I said, What wreck? And he said, that. And it was, of course, next to the Ritz Theater is Coggle Motor. And there sat my granddaddy's truck. Unrecognizable. You couldn't tell what it was. And he says, "Gee, Gary, didn't you know?" And they drove off and left me standing there. And I thought, what am I going to do? I thought, well, to begin with, I'll call Jimmy. So I went to the phone booth and I called Jimmy Stovall. And of course, he was in the hospital. He cracked a rib and broke a bone. And I got his mother instead, and she was a very strange lady. And I said, "Miss Stovall, this is Gary Carden. It was my granddaddy's truck that Jimmy wrecked." And she says, "Oh, Jimmy wrecked your granddaddy's truck? Listen, I'm so glad you called because we can't find Jimmy's glasses. Would you go over there and look in the floorboard?" "Thank you, dear." And she hung up. And so I had to go home and tell my grandfather what had happened to his truck. And he kind of lost it. He really did. He frightened me. And he got up the next morning and he told me, he says, I can't stand the sight of you. Go away. I don't want to even look at you." And he came later on in the day and he says, I've called Albert in Brevard. That was my Uncle Albert that I was crazy about. And he says, Albert is going to get you a job. And you're going to Brevard for the summer. Because if I see you much more, I'm afraid I'm going to kill you. Now, here's your bus ticket. And so I caught the bus to Brevard. And that was exotic. It would be like some of y'all going to New York. You know, I was going to Brevard. And I got off the bus in Brevard and my uncle took me home. And it showed great promise. I thought, I'm going to love this, because the first thing I did was watch the Mickey Mouse Club on TV, which I couldn't see at home. We didn't get good reception. And I thought, gee, I'm here all summer and I'll watch the Mickey Mouse Club every day. But that's not the way it turned out. It turned out my Uncle Albert had got me a job in the tannery where he was the paymaster. Now, if you don't know about tanneries, they were all over western North Carolina. They were an industry that was devoted to a lot of things. I guess one of the things was to convert raw hides, like a cow hide, goat hide, dog hide, they didn't care, into something that they could make shoe leather out of. And so I was supposed to be honored and pleased that Albert had gotten me a job in the tannery. So he took me over and they took me down to my job. And I worked next to the green hide room. Now, those of you who don't know what a green hide room is, that's rotting flesh. The flesh turns green and it's hanging on the hides. And they hang them on the wall. And these guys get in there with these razor knives and they cut all that off. And when they get through, they hang it up and let it season. And then it comes to the department that I'm in. Now, when they took me in there, they took me to a table. It's about as big as that table would be if it were opened out, see? And told me I would be working with 3 other people. We would stand around that table. And one of them was a terrifying woman. She turned out to be a very nice woman, but she looked a little like Boris Karloff. And she was huge, you know, and there's big arms standing here, and she was blonde. And then there was a guy who hummed all the time. He hummed mostly Eddie Arnold, you know. Singing the cattle call. And then there was Willard, and Willard was despicable. I didn't like him immediately. He snickered all the time, whether there was anything funny or not. And we were working together around that table. Okay, what we did, we strapped these brushes on. They went on your forearm here. They were as long as your forearm was. And they brought in a vat of yellow gunk. And you put your brush in that yellow gunk, see? And then you spread it all over that hide. Now the hide was something to see. It was usually full of holes. That was why it was an inferior hide. It had been rejected by the shoe people. Well, this guy who owned the tannery, Mr. Silverstein, he bought up hides like that. And it was our job to make them acceptable as shoe leather, you know. And if you didn't get it the first trip, then it would be the 10th trip, you know. That hide was put on that table and here you went, you know. And we all 3 did it, and when we got through, they picked the hide up and took it over and put it on the buffing machine. And the buffing machine had these big rollers that hit that strip of leather. Boom, boom, boom. And when it got together, it shook the whole building. And the building was like a big barn anyway. And we had a bucket of water where we could wash our brushes. And give you an idea, that bucket was always about half full of water, because that building was, and it was like walking on a ship deck, you know, to walk across that floor with it shifting like that under you. Well, there I was with these people. The guy that sung, I liked him. Lily, that was the big blonde that looked like Frankenstein. Very nice. But it was a strange place, and we were given 15-minute breaks every 2 hours, which were deducted from our salary. It was that kind of place. When we got our break, Willard went straight to smoke a cigarette, and the guy that sung country and western went with him, and Lily laid down on the floor, and she was amazing. She could go to sleep immediately. And she'd sleep 15 minutes, and then they'd blow the whistle, and we'd get up and go back to doing the same thing again to those heights, you know. And Willard, when he would go to smoke a cigarette, I would go with him and sit on the deck with him while he smoked, and he would tell me these outlandish stories about what he did for amusement in life. And he told me, he says, well, I'll tell you what I do. Every Saturday, we work half a day. And we did. We worked half a day on Saturday. And then they paid us $12 for the week if you hadn't spent it on the punch board. Or you hadn't spent it in the cafe. Now, the cafe was called the Green Fly. The first couple of days I couldn't eat, but you get used to anything. And after a week I ate with considerable zest. I ate cornbread and pintos with the best of them, you know. You can adjust to anything. And so we adjusted to that. But Willard would sit on the deck and tell me what he did for amusement. And his ideal thing was, he said, when we got paid on Saturday, was to get in his car and drive to York, which is the first town across the South Carolina line. And he said he would stop then in a whiskey joint and cash his check. And I know about those. They'll cash your check provided you buy something. And so he always bought a fifth of John Paul Jones whiskey, which is the cheapest they make. You know, it's really terrible stuff. And then he would go over to the firecracker place, and he would buy Chinese firecrackers that came in big strings, you know, and he would buy cherry bombs, which are kind of dangerous, you know. Most of you know a story about somebody flushing a cherry bomb down a commode at school or something like that. Well, he got a bag of cherry bombs, and his great enjoyment in life was to come back to Brevard and go down on Carver Street. Carver Street is the black neighborhood. And he waited until late at night, and he'd drive back and forth on Carver Street, and every time he saw a group of black people, he would light us and throw it. And he'd tell me about it, and he'd just crack up. You should have seen him run. Okay. I lasted 2 months there. And the last week I was there, when Grandpa called and said I could come home, I went back to work Monday morning, and Willard wasn't there. And you didn't skip work. You skip work, they just go get somebody else. And Tuesday, Willard wasn't there. But Wednesday, he was there. But he was tape from right here at his nose, clear down, covering his chin, all over his mouth. I mean, something bad had happened to Willard. And he had cut a little slit in the tape so he could put a Lucky Strike cigarette in there, you know. And so here it is, Wednesday, my last day working at Silverstein Tannery. And I go out and sit down by Willard, and my curiosity, I've never been interested in Willard, but I did want to know what happened to him. him. And so I sat down by it and I says, Willard, what happened? He says, well, Gary, I cashed my check last Saturday. And I went and got my Paul Jones, and I went and got my firecrackers, my cherry bombs. And I come back to Brevard, and I got to Brevard. I went up on Carver Street, and they was having a revival at the black church. So I pulled in by the church and waited for them to get out, you know. And I drank a little Paul Jones and wait and smoke and listen to the radio, you know. Well, it was 11 o'clock before they come out. And when they come out and come down the steps, I'd finished off that Paul Jones. But I cranked my window down and I kind of coasted my car down until I was right in the thick of them, you know. And then I took a cherry bomb and took my cigarette and I lit that cherry bomb, you know, and I threw that cigarette at him and put that cherry bomb in my That's enough to make you believe in God and justice. But it was a terrible episode, but I tell you, every time I think about Willard and that cherry bomb, I laugh a little. That was